Joe Rogan has become a cultural giant. Many of us know him from his podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience, and his commentary on mixed martial arts fights. Many of us also know that Joe is no stranger to controversy. Rogan isn't afraid to express his opinion, even if it gets him in hot water. Whether it's with fans, judges, or UFC fighters, Joe's not one to hold back. He'll make his opinions known and deal with the consequences later. Here are some of Joe Rogan's hot takes about the UFC. We'll specifically be looking at comments from the podcaster that garnered some backlash, which usually comes from fans and fighters alike. First up, we have Rogan's verdict on a fight at UFC 282. The fight in question took place in December 2022 and was between Jan Blachowicz and Magomed Ankalaev. The bout lasted 5 rounds and ended in a split draw. With the showdown intended to crown a new light heavyweight champ, the result caused a lot of disappointment. After the fight, Joe Rogan stepped into the ring and told Team Ankalaev, "We thought you won the fight."
We thought you won the fight.
Hearing that left a poor taste in Blachowicz's mouth. In a post-fight interview, the former light heavyweight champ expressed his frustration, calling the comment a mistake. He took the words to heart and sought input from others who were present for the fight. The comment only added insult to injury on top of the expectation that there wouldn't be a rematch, and the title match would go to 2 other fighters. In that instance, Rogan quickly put himself in the hot seat. Second on the list, we have Rogan's comments regarding how a fight was scored at UFC 277 back in July 2022. The fight was a heavyweight preliminary match between Hamdi Abdelhawab and Don'Tale Mayes. Abdelhawab won the fight on a split decision, with 2 judges scoring the fight 29-28 in favor of the winner. Seth Fuller, an experienced MMA judge, scored the fight 29-28 in favor of Mayes. That scorecard garnered a lot of criticism from many individuals, including Rogan. The commentator went so far as to say, "We need to check and see what he bet on." Fuller was fed up with the criticism and backlash he was getting, especially when the comments targeted his knowledge and integrity. The judge went on to release a response video in which he broke down the fight. He went play by play, making notes on why he scored the fight the way he did. Fuller later said that the video wasn't meant to criticize others' opinions and noted that he has a thick skin.
Because if I'm doing it wrong, then cite me for doing it wrong. But if you're pretending that I'm not experienced or as careless, then you're crazy. You're just plain wrong. It's not okay.
The intention of his response was only to explain his scoring and prevent himself from being removed from future fights due to the league potentially caving the public opinion. For our third entry, we'll focus on Joe Rogan's beef with Stephen A. Smith. This verbal bout came after the events of UFC 246 in 2020. The two had differing opinions about the match between Conor McGregor and Donald "Cowboy" Cerrone. The match, which lasted 40 seconds, ended with McGregor winning via knockout. Smith had commented that Cerrone's fear held him back and resulted in a short fight. Rogan later defended Cerrone, commenting that Smith's opinion came from a place of little understanding of the sport. He went on to list some of the fighter's accomplishments. On his final note, he said Smith's comments were an insult to the fighter's ability. This led to a back and forth between the two commentators over social media. Smith responded in a video posted to his Twitter account, apologizing to Rogan, but reasserting his opinion of the fight. Rogan later responded on his podcast and came to the conclusion that Smith just didn't understand the sport. Speaking of McGregor, he is part of the next entry on our list. In this hot take, Rogan made comments in response to the fighter's physique. His opinion set off McGregor, which we'll get into now. The reason McGregor's potential steroid use came into question was because he revealed impressive gains after recovering from a broken tibia. The injury he suffered came from his most recent fight back in July 2021. In that fight, McGregor lost to Dustin Poirier after his leg broke in the first round. McGregor had been taking time to recover from the injury and get himself back into fighting shape. When photos of the fighter's physique came out following his recovery, there were murmurs that he used performance-enhancing drugs. Rogan did not murmur. In an expletive-filled remark, the podcaster said that McGregor looked like his urine would melt the testing cup. McGregor didn't take too kindly to that, offering his own comments on Joe's body as a rebuttal. The fighter tweeted 2 images of Rogan at different ages with a caption that mirrored his comments about the fighter's urine. Eventually, the two squashed their beef. During the weigh-ins for Jon Jones' title fight, McGregor made an appearance. He was there promoting the upcoming movie Roadhouse with his co-star Jake Gyllenhaal. Rogan and McGregor greeted each other like friends and hugged it out. It was good for fans to see that there was no longer any bad blood between the two. In our fifth spot, we will cover Rogan's comments on Sijara Eubanks. Eubanks had recently been set to fight Valentina Shevchenko for a title at UFC 230. The fight was set to be the main event of the night. However, the announcement sparked backlash because Shevchenko was originally set to fight the former strawweight champion, Joanna Jędrzejczyk, at UFC 231. She was being pulled from that fight to take on a new contender. Eubanks understood the backlash but shook most of it off, saying that it set the stage for her to have her moment. The outcry led to the cancellation of her fight, and Eubanks felt like she was robbed of her shot at UFC gold. Through it all, there was one comment she was not able to shrug off so easily. When the announcement was made, Joe Rogan didn't hold back on his comment. He said, "No offense, but I don't even know who Sijara is, and I'm the commentator for the UFC," suggesting she was too unknown and not worthy of a main event fight. The comment set Eubanks off. She saw it as disrespectful and careless on his part, especially because he has a presence in the UFC. She went on to say that she would show Joe Rogan who she is the next time they were in the ring together. While she talked tough, she ultimately took the high road when they met face to face. At UFC 230, Eubanks fought and beat Roxanne Modafferi. Before a post-fight interview, the two met up and Joe apologized for how his comment came off. Eubanks accepted his apology and the two went on with the post-fight interview. Finally, we come to a hot take that isn't about a particular fighter. Instead, this deals with comments Joe Rogan had about the UFC and MMA as a whole. In a fairly recent episode of his podcast, Rogan suggested that blows to the back of the head and other previously illegal moves should be legal. More specifically, Rogan said, "I don't know if we should stop hitting people in the back of the head," going on to argue that it happens in fights anyway. He claimed that in certain situations, punching to the side of the head isn't realistic. The comments sparked confusion and backlash among sports fans. For one thing, the rules that made those kinds of moves illegal were set in place more than 2 decades ago. In 2000, the UFC adopted those unified rule changes to bring more regulation to the league. Many noted that in social media posts responding to the podcast. They also noted the potential damage the illegal blows could cause fighters. Some equated Rogan's ideal fight sport to street fighting, which of course has a different end goal. The fact that Rogan called out those changes recently just struck many as odd. Others had a lot to say about Rogan's comments. As we mentioned at the beginning, Joe Rogan is no stranger to controversy. From having controversial guests on his podcast to spouting off his own hot takes, Rogan continues to garner praise and backlash. As a UFC commentator, he'd naturally make comments about fighters and the league that stirred many people up. The examples we explored today were some of his most relevant UFC hot takes.